A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on the dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a cage bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmarish scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. This poem by Maya Angelou about a caged bird singing and longing for freedom helps illustrate the theme of bondage in The Awakening by Kate Chopin. There are many ways Chopin explored bondage in her novel, and the first is through the symbolism of birds. Chopin began her novel with this scene. A green and yellow parrot, which hung in a cage outside the door, kept repeating over and over. He could speak a little Spanish, and also a language which nobody understood, unless it was the mockingbird that hung on the other side of the door, whistling his slutty notes out upon the breeze with maddening persistence. Mr. Pontellier, unable to read his newspaper with any degree of comfort, arose with an expression and an exclamation of disgust. In this quote, the bird represented Edna, a woman with an independent soul who yearned for escape from the cage of societal oppressions. Her cries for freedom, addressing concepts not familiar to the 19th century society, are similar to how the parrot spoke in a language that no one else knew. When Mr. Pontellier reacted with disgust to the parrot, it further highlighted how the idea of breaking past societal bounds itself was looked down upon and was almost foreign in its society of strict expectations. To further understand such expectations, let's look at the work of a prominent 19th century writer, Emily Dickinson. This is her poem, I Am Wife. I'm wife, I've finished that other state. I'm czar, I'm woman now. It's safer so. How odd the girl's life looks behind this soft eclipse. I think that earth feels so to folks in heaven now. This being comfort, then that other kind was pain. But why compare? I'm wife. Stop there. In this poem, Dickinson emphasized how strong the idea of marriage was to women at the time. It was said to be the goal of woman's life, an escape from that other state into the comfort of a married life. When Dickinson wrote, "But why compare?" she was referring to the comparison of peace of a married life and the freedom of self that comes with being single. Chopin expressed a similar idea through this quote. It would have been a difficult matter for Mr. Pontellier to define his own satisfaction, or anyone else's, wherein his wife failed in her duty towards their children. The late 19th century society the novel was set in limited women's freedom of expression and, in a way, reduced them to voiceless possessions. Their only purpose was said to be to serve their husbands and children to a selfless degree. Edna's need for freedom later in the book drove her to distance herself away from Mr. Pontellier and her children. She moved to a place called Pigeon House. Chopin wrote, "The Pigeon House pleased her. Every step which she took towards relieving herself from obligations added to her strength and expansion as an individual." Pigeon House symbolized a step towards freedom for Edna from the obligations of society. It symbolized Edna's happiness and identity. Towards the end of the novel, when her desperateness of setting herself free from such expectations drove Edna to suicide, Chopin wrote, "A bird with a broken wing was beating the air above, reeling, fluttering, circling, disabled down into the water. According to our interpretations, the bird symbolized Edna's desires. The broken wing, on the other hand, gave a visual representation of society's desires that bound her down. When Edna tried seeking independence, society tried to keep her grounded. The bird falling into the sea, giving up on its hunt for dreams in life, foreshadowed how Edna herself found death to be the most fulfilling option." The parrot, the mockingbird, the pigeon, and the lasting image of a bird flying with a broken wing are all integral to the awakening. They help us understand what motivated Edna to end her life and realize the message about societal expectations that Chopin was trying to send through her writing. Similar to Maya Angelou's poem earlier, birds are free creatures that nature intended to fly and explore the undiscovered. They should not be kept in cages, as they are meant to freely soar the skies in search for their dreams. Chopin used the same concept to express the wrongness of gender roles. She wanted to emphasize how independence and freedom should be granted to everyone, regardless of their gender. The significance of art is another way Chopin discussed bondage in her writing. When describing Edna's painting, Chopin wrote, "She handled her brushes with a certain ease and freedom which came, not from long and close acquaintance with them, but from natural aptitude." The ease and freedom Edna experiences implied that she viewed painting as a temporary distraction away from society's bounds, emphasizing the concept of societal expectations in Chopin's writing. This idea was further expressed by the structure and formatting of the novel. The Awakening was written somewhat like a series of paintings, with short, usually one-scene chapters with special emphasis on visual imagery. This allowed the reader to experience Edna's world almost through her eyes, which highlighted again the wrongness of bondage in society. Chopin also ensured that her paintings, or rather visual appearances of her characters, reflected their personalities. She described Léonce as, "Mr. Pontellier wore eyeglasses. He was a man of 40, of medium height and rather slender build." For Adele, she said, "The fair lady of our dreams, the spun gold hair, the blue eyes that were nothing but sapphires, two lips that pouted, that were so red one could only think of cherries, or some other delicious crimson fruit." Léonce's appearance implied that he is a put-together man who paid special attention to society's desires. Similarly, Adele's woman-like description of a fair lady of our dreams suggested that she also resembled society's ideal for a woman. Both characters experienced bondage in the society, where expectations ruled their day-to-day life. Instead of fighting against expectations, they adhered to them closely to save their reputation. On the other hand, Chopin described Edna as, "Her eyebrows were thick and almost horizontal, emphasizing the depth of her eyes. She was rather handsome than beautiful. Her face was captivating by reason of a certain frankness of expression and a contradictory, subtle play of features." Edna's painting, in sharp contrast to Adele, make her appear unladylike to some extent. The horizontal eyebrows and rather handsome than beautiful face help the reader infer that she is a strong-willed character. Similar to Léonce and Adele, she also experienced society's bondage. However, unlike them, her appearance foreshadowed how she will push against the bondage in their society. Through the use of paintings, Chopin allows her reader to gain an internal perspective of the awakening. She also uses paintings to further emphasize the idea of bondage in society and foreshadows how it affected the life of her characters by painting their appearances using different diction. To better understand the relationship of societal bondage and suicide, let's explore a modern-day connection between The Awakening and the movie adaptation of Me Before You. The main characters of Me Before You and The Awakening both displayed various similarities. William from Me Before You and Edna from The Awakening, both trapped in their own worlds for different reasons. William had a motorcycle accident which left him paralyzed from waist down. He became stuck in a wheelchair for the rest of his life, which led him to experience the feeling of being trapped. Eventually, he lost his motivation to live his life as the way he did before. In the case of Edna, she was living in a society where her perspective and ambitions were looked down upon. She as well lost her motivation to continue living life in a degrading society. Both characters tried to pursue living their lives, trying alternative activities, but sadly, they failed, and in the end still believed that there was no other option of true freedom besides death. Both characters share similar approaches on how to escape their bondage. They also left behind their loved ones, hoping to take their own burden away.
Potential. You need to widen your horizons, Clark. You only get one life. It's actually your duty to live it as fully as possible.
In the video, William understood the need of fulfillment in life. This is why he gave advice to Clark, as to encourage her to not miss any opportunities she receives during her own lifetime. He knew he couldn't do the same, similar to Edna, who understood that society would not allow her needs to be fulfilled. The use of the theme of bondage in The Awakening helped give light to Kate Chopin herself. Besides Edna's and Chopin's similar independence craving and strong-willed personalities, they also share several other similarities. Both Edna and Chopin were creative people who faced limitations to their artistic ventures when they attempted to express themselves the way they desired. For a conversation between Edna and Mademoiselle Reyes, Chopin included the following: Painting, laughed Edna. I am becoming an artist. Think of it. Ah, an artist? You have pretensions, madam. For many years, Edna was allowed to paint within set boundaries. However, as soon as she started stepping outside these boundaries, wanting to paint professionally, she was encouraged to push herself back down and not to step outside her role. This can be seen in Mademoiselle Reisz's reaction of surprise, which represented society's views. Despite this, Edna expanded her art, even selling some of her paintings when she moved to Pigeon House. This act of committing to her true desires helped contribute to the social pressures which ultimately led to her eventual death. Similarly, Chopin also attempted to step outside of her boundaries as a female writer. Chopin's work prior to the Awakening visited themes of gender roles to a much lesser extent. For example, her work, A Pair of Silk Stockings, published just 2 years before the Awakening, talked about a woman who chose to spend her money on a pair of silk stockings for herself rather than buying clothes for her children. While this piece did aggress to some degree independence from motherly roles, it was nowhere near as extreme as the Awakening, where Edna turned to death in order to satisfy her search for this independence. The Awakening stepped far outside of the boundaries society had used to imprison Chopin's words. When it was published, critics strongly opposed it, and many places banned her book until years after her death. This significantly harmed her writing career. After the Awakening, Chopin was able to publish only a few short stories, none of which succeeded in reaching popularity. Society, in this case, forbade Chopin from further spreading her writing. Although the death in this case is metaphorical rather than literal, it reflects the ending of Edna from the Awakening. Chopin used Edna as a medium to express how she felt about her own world. The theme of bondage was not only important to Edna herself, but it also helped illuminate the idea of sacrifice. Through the Awakening, Chopin highlighted how deviating too far from society's standards resulted in sacrifice that were way too extreme.